Welcome back to the London Free Press Podcast. Thank you once again for joining us. So happy to have you here. I'm your host, Lindsay Barnett, and I'm excited. We're switching gears a little bit this week, and it's been a few weeks since I've had a chance to catch up with London Free Press sports reporter Ryan Payette. Ryan, how you doing today?
Great, Lindsay. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much for joining. It's always a good time when I get to talk sports with you, and it's very exciting in the city of London once again. We're very lucky here with the caliber of athletics we have in the city, and Western University, no exception. The Mustangs have booked their ticket, their 15th Vanier Cup appearance this coming Saturday. Wow. Can we talk about this team a little bit and how we got to this point?
Yeah, you know what, Lindsay, it's an amazing story. And also we always talk about the pandemic, right? So last year's season, in 2018, the Mustangs went to the Vanier Cup and lost. And that was after in 2017, they won it. They won their 7th. So this year they'll be looking for their 8th. And they missed their 2020 season. They were getting ready for it. And obviously the pandemic got in the way. The kids couldn't really get together. The ones most of the team was in London, and they were in their apartments or houses that they were living in. They weren't really allowed to interact much with the team. And I just thought it was an amazing story because here you have this team, and they, 100, there's 100, a lot of kids involved in the Western football team. And so what they did was Jeff Watson, the longtime strength coach, their workout area at the Kirkley Center on campus, he started taking all the dumbbells and barbells and weights and all the exercise machines and started distributing them around the city so the kids would have something to do, after their online classes kind of thing. So you think of these guys were in garages, they're in backyards. Nick Terrio said, one guy said, he's a defensive lineman on the team. He said one guy would have barbells. So you'd go over to his house and lift some barbells. Then you'd go over to another guy's that had a bench press. And, you think of in our city there, when things were pretty bad and shut down, and you got all these football players trying to find ways to stay fit because they knew eventually they'd come back. And then here in 2021, they started they say, okay, we're going to have an abbreviated season. So instead of 8-game regular season, they have 6. And then we're going to have 2 divisions. So, the Western played Waterloo and Windsor a bunch of times, Laurier, and then a crossover at the end. So when they played Queens, they had no idea. They watched the film, right? But they had never seen them or played anybody that played against them. And they shut out Queens in the Yates Cup. And then, of course, in the Mitchell Bowl, it's been a tough run for the Acadia, for the Atlantic provinces. Teams like Acadia, St. Francis Xavier, who is here, the last several years, they've been pretty much destroyed by whoever they played from the other conference, Quebec, Canada West, or Ontario. And we saw the people that went to the game on Saturday at Western University, they were excited because it was the last game they'd see in person unless you're going to travel to the Vanier Cup. So they were hoping for a good game, and it was 61-6, and it was 51-3 at halftime, and it was not a good. It was on CHCH TV, and it's not a good look for university sports. The other game, though, should be noted. Saskatchewan, who Western will be playing on Saturday in the Vanier Cup. They beat Montreal, who's the number 1 ranked team all season. They beat them on a last second touchdown in the final minute kind of thing. And so that was an exciting game. And then everybody looks at this and they're like, Western winning 61-6, this other very exciting game. How what's going on here and how do we fix this? And that was a big debate all week, really. And it will be after the season's over as well.
Well, I'm curious to see kind of what happens with regards to the Vanier Cup, because as you mentioned, the Huskies game was a lot closer. That score ended up being 13-1 versus the Western X-Men game of 61-6. As you mentioned, Western entering the Vanier Cup with a 9-1 record, Huskies coming in with an 8-1 record on the year. What do you expect to see on Saturday? Do you think it's going to be close, or do you think it's going to be kind of a blowout like we saw last weekend?
Well, I think this is a really good Western team. whenever they have the offensive and defensive lines as strong as they are with a bunch of all-stars, you know they have the playmakers. You know they have the people that make plays there. So when their lines are good, Greg Marshall always recruits hard on the lines, the big boys, as you'd say, and they look phenomenal. And they had all kinds of they rushed at will. Basically, they ran the ball at will against St. Francis Xavier. And I think Saskatchewan is very concerned. I talked to some of their people, and they're like, we know we have a physical team. We know we hit hard, but we'll see on the weekend if it's hard enough, kind of thing. Like, they're very impressed with the Western team. And Greg Marshall, obviously Greg's been around a long time. He coached in the CFL. He's coached in U Sports for decades. And he says, I love Saskatchewan football. This will be the most physical game that we play all year. And they played against Queens and Guelph and some of the other teams, Waterloo. There's some real physical tests. But he said, these guys are going to hit hard and they're going to really test our guys. And, so when it's intense like that, there isn't a home team this year. It's in Laval. And for the first time in 12 years, there's not a home team. So to see a real intense, in the trenches battle, I'm really looking forward to it. And, maybe Western pulls away early. I don't know. But if Saskatchewan keeps it kind of close like they did against Montreal, hey, if you can beat Montreal, you can beat anybody. So, I think it's going to be, if Western either will pull away early, or it's going to be one of those, dogfights to the end, like we saw in the UTEC Bowl last week when Saskatchewan, they beat Montreal. I don't know if they call it an upset, though, because Saskatchewan has an amazing program too, and they're trying to build themselves up, kind of like the Lavals and the Westerns are kind of on the top. And Saskatchewan has a long history too, and they're trying to get there too. They haven't won a Vanier Cup, they've lost their last 4 appearances, and they haven't been there since 2006. They were there 3 in a row at one point, 2004 to 2006. So they're real hungry. And as we said, Western, there's guys on this team that have won the Vanier Cup, and there's guys that have lost the Vanier Cup. So for the veteran guys, this is a big deal. And a lot of guys came back. Both teams, a lot of guys, took that year in the pandemic, and they said, we're coming back. Like, we're going to come back and play. So there's some older guys. There's some older guys on the team. There's some guys that are 24, 25, 26. And that's an interesting point too, because there still is, it's designed for 18 to 22-year-olds, right? Sometimes guys come into college at 20 years old and play till 24, but there's a lot more of them this year.
Absolutely. I do want to correct myself. Sorry, the score was 13-1 going into the fourth quarter. It was 14-10 final between the Huskies and the Carabins. One thing and I want to rewind the clock a little bit, that surprised me, and I probably shouldn't be saying this as somebody who lives in London, but with regards to the Yates Cup, I was shocked because Queens also went into that game. They had been undefeated up until that point. And it kind of, in my opinion, set the tone for Western moving forward. With regards to what we talked about with the blowouts happening, what's the discussion been like to kind of even the playing field for teams across Canada? Because there is such a huge difference in these scores that we're seeing.
Yeah, first of all, if you're trying to, you have to have some sort of, like, I hate to say it, but you're going to have some sort of salary cap to what schools can spend. There needs to be a floor. You can't just buy a bunch of helmets and shoulder pads and throw a team out there. That's not right. But you also need, you can't have these teams spending, as Greg Marshall said, 5-6 times what everybody else does. You get into the millions of dollars in some of these programs. And Western has a fundraising wing for its football team because it's important to them, and they want to. The school likes winning Vanier Cups. They like being there. It's good for the schools. It's good for the school's PR, and may attract great people to the school. We've seen that over the years that there's been premiers and top businessmen end up come through Western through the football program. So it's important to them, but at the same time, you can't have 4 or 5 teams. And we see the same teams get there every year kind of thing, and then expect the rest of the programs to keep up, because it's just not viable. So, and there's a bit of this in the NCAA as well, but there's just way more teams now. And Greg Marshall raised a great point when we discussed this while he was on the bus to Laval this week, and he's like, "When's the last time that a new U Sports football program started up?" Like Carleton came back, but Carleton had a history. Sherbrooke came in there in Quebec with Quebec football, like London, huge, growing. It's kind of a staple sport. But these other programs, like, you think of Brock, you think of big schools around our province that don't have teams. And why? Well, the cost is kind of prohibitive. So there needs to be something done there to make it, to increase the number of teams. There's really, if it stays stagnant, then you're only going to have the same number of teams, and you'd like to have some growth, right? So the other thing is the Atlantic Conference, and you look at the rosters. There was a bunch of kids from London on the X-Men when they came here. There's a ton of Ontario kids. They're small, and in the past they were able to attract real blue chip prospects from around the country. And that doesn't seem to be happening anymore. They seem to be going to the Calgarys and the Westerns and the Lavals and the Montreals. And, so you're going to get this. And I mean, so many people have been great and wrote in and suggested how we can fix this thing. And you're really up against it, Lindsay, because this is, first of all, it's school. So you got exams in December. So you can't add a bunch of games to the schedule. There really isn't much you can do. And the other thing is the weather. I mean, now that we're in December here, and this is a late Vanier Cup because of the pandemic kind of thing, you might be in a blizzard. So these kids train all year for this, and then you might have play in terrible conditions, and that's not right either. And I think that's why it was for many, many years, it was at the Sky Dome at Rogers Center, and because you knew you were indoors kind of thing, and you'd have a proper final. But I really feel for the teams out east. My suggestion, I've heard a million good suggestions, but mine is that you have to bleed the Atlantic playoffs. You can still have a Loney Bowl, but at some point they have to meld into the Quebec playoffs. And then my thought would be to have the Ontario champion and the Canada West champion play every year, but then switch. 1 year it's in Ontario, the next year it's out in Saskatchewan or Alberta or Manitoba, BC, wherever. And then, because one of the issues, and not everybody thinks about this, is Montreal had won their conference. There's not very many teams in the Quebec conference. And then they sat there and they waited. They had a bye week, and then they went in to play against Saskatchewan. Now, Saskatchewan beat them, but to me, bye weeks in football are huge for rest and to rest these guys' bodies. So if there's a way to get the Atlantic Conference into the Quebec Conference so they don't have that bye, but still have the prestige of winning a league championship, I think, there's a lot of smart people at universities. They could probably figure out how to do this and kind of keep the integrity of the sport. But, some people won't like that because it's like, well, you won't see Quebec in a semifinal and all that. But I think if you had every year, like if the Atlantic Conference stays weak and you had a Quebec, Montreal or Laval, say, play a Western or a Saskatchewan or a Calgary or whoever wins the OUA that year, I think it'd be an amazing final. And I think you could sell that as a TV package, kind of East against West, or, like Ontario versus Quebec. And I think then you'd start to maybe get it back to where, people would want to watch the game and that sort of thing. And, I'm interested to see what the crowd's going to be this year, because there's no Laval in Montreal. There's no home team. So, I've been to Memorial Cups where once the home team gets beat out, that's, the tournament's over kind of thing from their perspective, right? So, I know it's a very good football city, and I know that the Western travels well. It'd be hard to see many people coming from Saskatchewan, even though it's Rider Nation and they love their football. It's amazing, the passion, a couple hundred maybe, right? So it'll interest me to see if they get 10,000 people at the game. Whereas, that I remember growing up, the games where there's 25,000 people at the Sky Dome for the games and stuff, right? So, and this is this is amazing football. I love this football more. I don't watch the NFL as much. The 4-down stuff. I love this, and it's you think of what Western did in the Yates Cup with a shutout, and because you can get one, with the safeties and the field position and the big field, and kicking the root, kicking the 1-pointers, right? How hard it is to shut somebody out. So that was amazing when Western did that. And this is an incredible Western team. They got a ton of team chemistry on it. They're big and strong and fast, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I hope it's good for the game, because they do need you need 8 or 10 teams that you can say every year they might win it all, kind of. Even when we've talked about the Knights in the past. The Knights really don't. They've gone to a bunch of Memorial Cups in the last 10 years, but they don't win it every year, right? So this is something that football has to have a lot of the schools, the athletic directors, and the coaches really have to get together on this. And I hope they do. They've talked in the past, but they haven't put a ton into action. So they need to start doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insight on this, Ryan. Just quickly, because we are out of time before I let you go, I'd like to be unfair to you and always put you on the spot. Do you have a prediction for the final score on Saturday?
I'd say it's going to be. I'll say it's a 10-pointer. I'd say if you're betting the spread, don't go over 10. I think it's going to be a good game. So I really hope it is, and I hope it's not, because I had to sit through that 61-6 game last week, and I hope I don't have to sit through 40-10 or something like that. I'll say 40-30. I like high scoring games too.
Okay, perfect. Well, you heard it here first. Thank you so much, Ryan. The 56th Vanier Cup happens this Saturday, 1:00. Obviously, if you're not traveling to Quebec to go watch it, you can catch the game on CBC. Ryan, thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. I look forward to, it'll probably be Knights hockey that we're talking about next time.
Probably.
Yeah, great to see you as always. Again, if you're enjoying these podcasts, please hit subscribe. We are streaming on all of the major podcast platforms: Spotify, Stitcher, Google, of course, over on YouTube, lfpress.com, on Apple Podcasts. Please hit the subscribe button. We do appreciate it. We'll be back again next Thursday with another edition of the LF Press Podcast. Until then, stay well.